Hi.
And you are?
Stuart Candy.
Yeah, from?
From Australia originally, and I live in the United States and work at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
What do you do in there?
I'm a professor in the School of Design, an associate professor, and the School of Design has a kind of curricular commitment to something called transition design, which is really based on the idea that every designer should be capable of doing their design activity with a view to the kind of world that they want to bring about and the kind of worlds that they want to avoid. And since that is essentially what futures practice and scholarship are about, I teach futures thinking and methods and approaches to designers throughout the school.
Why did you decide to be a futurist?
Well, I guess it was a decision, but it doesn't always feel like one. It feels more of a magnetic pull. I came across the field at quite a young age when I was a school student, and even though it wasn't available to study when I went to university, I maintained an interest in it and started coming to World Future Studies Federation conferences when I was about 17. And so it was always part of my thinking, really, throughout my entire adult life. And then I worked for a couple of projects for the government, the federal government in Australia, and then in the United Kingdom. And after that consulting work, I realized I wanted to be around people who understood the work, so that I didn't have to explain it to everyone I met, and so that I could work more at the edge of the field, methodologically, kind of pushing things forward rather than just working on kind of the basics over and over. And so that drew me to do a higher degree in the field, or two actually, the master's and then the PhD at the University of Hawaii at Manoa program with Jim Dater. And from there, I continued to work as a kind of in three strands. One was education and academia, one was kind of art and activism, and one was consulting and applied work within organizations. And I try to maintain all three of those strands, even though in some ways it would be easier to just have one label. I think futures work is more effective, and it's possible to do more interesting experimental things when you operate across domains.
Okay, nice. Why do you think future studies are important for humanity?
Yeah, so that's the other part of the answer about why this was a magnetic pull for me. I think that the biggest problems that we have are bound up as humans, as a civilization, if we can call it that, are bound up with our lack of systematic attention to the consequences of our ways of thinking and being and doing. So, and I think futures as a field recognizes and deals with that more directly than any other community that I've come across, and that feels important and valuable enough to dedicate, my time to.
Of course. So, which do you think is a more effective way to stimulate the futurist mindset in people?
What do I think is the most effective way to stimulate a futurist mindset?
Yes.
Well, I don't think there's one answer to that. I mean, I think the reason why why we have an entire field rather than, just one tool like scenario planning is because there are lots of different facets to awakening that interest in and capacity to think systematically and creatively about possible futures. The subset of that work that I find most exciting and that I've devoted, going on a decade and a half to developing has to do with designing and staging experiences that feel like they are happening in the future and creating tangible fragments of those possible futures so that they become experiences rather than just ideas in the mind. So we call that practice experiential futures, and it builds on, decades of foundation laid by traditional futures work, but I think goes beyond it by bringing into the conversation and into play all kinds of media, artistic modalities, theater, design, filmmaking, games, and really whatever it takes. So the short answer to your question is the best way to do it is whatever it takes.
Okay. Which do you think have been your most important or your major contributions to future studies?
I mean, I think that's really for other people to judge rather than me. But I do think that this shift that we could call the experiential turn, to a kind of turn towards being interested in the inner dimensions of futures work and bridging between those and ways of manifesting that thought that are not purely academic and analytical. I think that I and my colleagues and collaborators and students have probably played an instrumental role in highlighting that that's an important thing to do, and then demonstrating that it is possible to make effective.
Okay. So the last question, which is the importance of events like this conference?
Well, I mean, the futures field is widely distributed, and it may be a thin layer in some places, but we're all over the world. And there's a critical need for us to come together in community and talk about what we've been doing, what we've been experiencing, the things that we're struggling with, the things that the problems that we've maybe cracked or solved. It's the community dimension to a kind of cross-cutting and global community dimension or counterpart to the work that we do in our respective organizations and geographies all over the place. I mean, I was introduced essentially to the futures field through the World Future Studies Federation and the academic door, which is unusual. I think many people come to it through practice, through discovery, and many people never come to it at all, right? Which is, I think, one of our challenges as a community of scholars and practitioners to make this available to a wider array of people everywhere. But the importance to me is that reconnecting with colleagues and fellow travelers, because it can be lonely work doing this in different kinds of organization where almost by definition you're working at the boundaries of what those organizations understand and see as valuable and legitimate. And so creating space for new ideas, for changes that need to be made, for cultural and sort of social entrepreneurship and innovation, this is work that requires a sort of community around it, and I think we come to these events for that community.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.